I think there's always been some kind of stigma around monster catching games that aren't Pokemon. In this video, I will definitely be drawing comparisons to the mainline Pokemon games, as they are essentially the benchmark when it comes to this specific type of game. I'm happy to say that my experience with Coromon has been a very positive one, and I genuinely enjoyed my time with it. My hope is that this video can help to normalize the idea of monster catching games being a genre rather than a monopoly. I've been a fan of Pokemon since I bought and played Pokemon Red in 1998, but I firmly believe there's room for other developers to produce their take on the genre. Coromon is one such take, and while it isn't perfect, I do think that it does a lot of things right. So as usual, let's start off with what the game is and what it's all about. Obviously, this is a monster catching or monster taming game if you prefer, which is very much in the same vein as the mainline Pokemon titles. As you might imagine, it follows the typical framework and is basically a variation on the standard JRPG formula. You progress through the world via the story, catch over 100 wild Coromon and raise them to be strong fighters. Battles are, of course, turn-based, and the game is presented in this 2D retro pixel art style. You play as a new trainer, who you can visually customize by the way, that leaves home to take a job as a battle researcher. Very quickly you find yourself caught up in a much bigger plot involving the Titan Task Force and the Elemental Titans themselves. As always, I won't be spoiling the plot, and I've also made an effort to only show the areas and the Coromon from the first areas of the game. At the start of the game you'll receive a gauntlet, which acts as a sort of multi-tool. It has a lot of different uses, and as you progress through the game, you'll unlock and install modules which can do a lot of different things, like help you find hidden items, destroy barriers, move items, repel wild Coromon, and a whole lot more. It's also your storage deck where you keep all of your items and where you can access the game's menus. Instead of potions, Coromon are fed different types of cakes, and while they have a different name, they are functionally identical. I should also point out that they aren't the type of cakes that humans would eat. The game does mention this to the player during the story, and it does explain it. There's all sorts of different cakes for things like recovering HP, SP, healing burns, curing curses, and pretty much everything else you can think of. I can also confirm the existence of the XP share type items, which are given to Coromon to hold in order to grant them a bit of XP even if they didn't partake in the fight themselves. I know that these can be a love it or hate it type thing, but I wanted to mention them and let you know that they do exist in the game. However, you don't have to use them if you don't want to. In fact, the whole game is actually designed to be as easy or as challenging as you want. The developers included a lot of accessibility options that will allow each player to tailor the experience to their liking. There's so many options to go through, but I'll give you a few examples. Firstly, there's the various difficulty levels, and these are not just simple increases to enemy stats or anything like that. If you play on easy, the Coromon will fully recover if they level up during a battle. Items will be 50% cheaper in the stores, and you don't need to use the dedicated revival items to heal them when they're knocked out. If you decide to play on the normal difficulty, it just removes those rules that I mentioned previously. If you decide to play on hard mode, the game will actually add a rule that when your Coromon faints in battle, it will leave your party forever and return to the wild. It's sort of like this game's permadeath mechanic, I suppose. Then going one step further, you've got the insane difficulty, which keeps the permadeath mechanic that I just mentioned, and then adds two more rules. The first is that you can't escape from any battles at all in the game, whether that be wild Coromon or trainer battles. The second is that you can only catch one Coromon in each area. If it's accidentally knocked out, well, you're out of luck and you've missed your chance in that area. You are allowed to catch as many perfect Coromon as you want though, and those are a bit like this game's version of shiny Pokemon, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. Considering that there's only 6 major areas in the game, this is a massive restriction, but that said, I bet it would make for some very interesting streams. There's also a selection of minor options for you to make use of or not, depending on what kind of playthrough you want to do. You can even unlock a randomizer mode which changes the location of all the different items and where the Coromon appear throughout the game. After a brief intro, you'll be asked to select one of 3 starter Coromon, which will be a familiar process to many monster catching fans. You can choose Toruga, the fire type, Nibelgar, the water type, or Cub-Zero, the ice type. I went for Toruga, but each of these can be caught elsewhere later in the game as well. Once you've made your choice, you're off on your adventure and you can start catching and battling. As you might expect, encountering a Coromon is as simple as taking a stroll through some tall grass or wandering about in a cave. A wild Coromon will appear and, as usual, lowering its HP, inflicting a status effect, or using a higher quality catching device will increase the odds of a successful catch. Rather than a Pokeball, you'll be using spinners, which are basically a mix of the classic Pokeball, a drone, and a ninja star. Kind of. Don't worry though, canonically the spinner doesn't really hit the Coromon, it sort of lands under them and pulls them in a little bit like the floor trap in Ghostbusters. You can of course acquire and use higher quality spinners such as silver and gold variants, but there's also spinners that work better for catching different Coromon types. As I mentioned earlier, this game does feature its own version of shiny Pokemon, and these come in two flavors. The more common of the two is the potent version, and the much rarer version is known as perfect. Both versions do come with different color changes, and the more interesting thing to note is that they are actually stronger. You see, each Coromon you encounter has a potential value that ranges from 1 to 21. As you can see here, if your Coromon has a potential of 1 to 16, it will just be the standard version. If it's 17 to 20, you'll get a potent version, and if it's 21, it'll be a perfect version. That's not where the system ends though. When earning XP, you'll notice that each Coromon has two progress bars. One is gold that represents their level, and the other is blue that represents their potential. When that blue potential bar fills up, you'll be able to allocate 3 extra stat points to any of the stats on that Coromon. You could put all 3 points into attack if you wanted to, or maybe 1 each into HP, defense, and attack. The choice is yours. This is where potential value from 1 to 21 plays its part. As an example, a Coromon with a potential value of 1 can only ever allocate up to 66 extra stat points, whereas a Coromon with a potential value of 21 can allocate up to 126 extra stat points, making them objectively stronger. It's also worth noting that Coromon can spawn with a few different traits, and some of them are rarer than others, which further feeds into the collecting aspect of the game. Each Coromon can only spawn with a few different variants of these traits, and pretty much all of them are passive bonuses. Just to give you a small example, there is a trait called Caffeinated, which gives that Coromon more SP for using moves, and there's another called Inner Fire, which means it can never be frozen. Most Coromon do in fact evolve into more powerful creatures at certain levels, but I really didn't want to spoil too many of the monster designs, so I intentionally didn't include any footage of it. Rest assured though, it works exactly as you might think. In terms of the combat, there really isn't too much to say. It's generally pretty clear cut and what I would call genre standard. Battles are turn-based and each Coromon has 4 moves that they can use. Unlike most Pokemon games though, when a new move is learned, older ones aren't forgotten. Instead, you can scroll through a list of every move that Coromon has ever learned, and then you can disable the ones you don't want to use, and then enable the ones that you do want to use. You'll also notice that if you run out of SP during a battle, which you need to actually use these moves, your Coromon can rest for a turn to recover some of it. There's also some items you can find in the game called Flash Skills, which are essentially TMs and can teach different moves to your Coromon outside of what they would naturally be able to learn. Winning battles results in XP, which levels up your Coromon and also increases their potential gauge. Type Advantage is another familiar mechanic to be aware of, and it mostly follows the tried and tested setup. This game, however, introduces some other types such as Magic, Sand, Foul, and Air, which, when you think about it, are probably just the standard types we all know but with different names. Sand is ground, Foul is dark, and Air is flying, if you see what I mean. The world that you traverse is called Valua, and it has 6 key areas for you to discover and explore. The main questline will lead you through all of these one by one. After making the journey to the first town, you'll be able to unlock the ability to fast travel to a few preset locations, which are generally other towns or places of interest. When on the travel map, you can actually see which Coromon are available in a specific area, as well as some blacked out images of the ones that you haven't encountered yet. In order to get the fast travel stations up and running, you will need to complete a small side quest. Each area of the game world has a few side quests for you to complete, and you can keep track of these in your logbook. There isn't any quest markers or anything like that, but it does give you some info on what to do next. The game also has a Battle Pass-like feature, but don't worry, it's not a paid thing or anything like that, it's just built into the game. It's very simple. You have a list of milestones to complete, which range from catching certain numbers of Coromon to winning battles, and these will earn you XP for the Battle Pass system. In-universe, I suppose the Battle Pass could be considered as being promoted within the Battle Researcher job that your character is doing. Each tier that you ascend rewards you with some pretty good items, and sometimes these include the XP share type items, amongst other things. Lastly, I do need to point out that this game is only available as a download upon release. The game has already been available on Steam since March 2022, but the version that I'm playing here is the new Nintendo Switch version, which officially releases on the 21st of July 2022. As far as I'm told, there is no current plans for a physical release. So now we get to the personal opinion section, where I can be a bit more casual and give you my overall view of the game. I really liked it, honestly. I'd say that I thoroughly enjoyed probably 90% of it, and the other 5% was still just fine. To elaborate on that a little bit, each major story moment that you go through has some kind of puzzle that you have to solve to progress, and some of you know I'm not too keen on puzzles, just personally, but to be fair, I guess it depends on the game and the puzzle itself. I didn't think they were too bad here, I guess I just found them to be a bit of a mild inconvenience. They aren't exactly difficult or anything, that's not really the issue, they just kinda get in the way of your progress and they last a tiny bit too long for my tastes. I suppose a more positive way to look at them is that they do break up the gameplay a little bit and give you a rest from all the catching and battling, so I guess it depends on how you see it. It's also worth pointing out that the game doesn't feature gym leaders or badges or anything of that nature. As with another great creature collecting game that I really enjoyed, Nexomon, progression in Coromon is gated by the story and by taking down powerful boss Coromon instead of defeating gyms and winning a league. Incidentally, the story will probably take you around 30 hours playing casually and maybe up to 50 hours to complete and catch everything. I don't really know if that would include collecting all the potent and perfect variants of the Coromon as well, but if not, you could absolutely extend it past the 50-hour mark in that case. As I've said in a few other videos, I know that not everyone is into the retro visuals and the pixel art style. That's absolutely fine. Me personally, as someone who played the first Pokemon games, this feels like a real love letter to them, and also gives you one huge dose of nostalgia. The thing that makes this special though, it's not just the pixel art stuff alone. This is a retro-looking game that includes lots of modern game design elements under the hood. A single screenshot makes this game look very static and, dare I say, even dull, but I think in motion it looks very nice indeed. The animations on the Coromon, and not to mention on everything else, are just so smooth and well presented. These are so good in fact that on the odd occasion, certain animations almost trick you into thinking that the Coromon is a 3D model when they clearly aren't. On top of that, I'm a huge fan of the Coromon designs, and the evolved forms look genuinely interesting, at least as far as I'm concerned. Being completely honest, I would go as far as saying that I like far more of the Coromon in this game than the new Pokemon that were added in Sword and Shield. Now, I've put myself on record before as saying that Sword and Shield are, in my opinion, the worst of the mainline Pokemon games, in almost every way. I do still feel that way as I record this, and don't get me wrong, I love the look of Pokemon like Corviknight for example, but I like almost every single Coromon in this game. It might be because Pokemon have gotten weirder and stranger in design over the years, and while there are some odd looking Coromon, they feel more grounded and much more like what we saw in the original Pokemon games like Red and Blue, Gold and Silver, and Ruby and Sapphire. Those three generations, for me, are the golden era of Pokemon, with Gold and Silver being my personal favourites. I also want to say this if it isn't clear to anybody, I do genuinely love Pokemon. I've loved it for a long time. I've literally been into it since it began, and I'm going to be a little bit harsh here. I think Game Freak can do better than what they're currently doing. I have Scarlet and Violet on pre-order, and although I haven't played them, they just look so much better than Sword and Shield to me, and I think that proves that they can in fact do better. Thing is though, better is relative to the person playing the game, isn't it? Better for me might not be better for you, and so on. I am aware of that. I can only give you my personal viewpoint on this channel. I can't speak factually about if a game is good or not, because it's subjective, you just can't do that. I can only tell you if I liked it or not, and for what it's worth, I think Coromon is absolutely brilliant. If you're somebody who really adores Pokemon and you'll just never see these games as more than a cheap clone or perhaps a rip-off, then there's not really much I can do or say for you. For people that adore Pokemon and are curious about games like this, I would honestly urge you to give them a try. Obviously, I do recommend Coromon rather highly, but there's also two Nexomon games, Monster Crown, Monster Sanctuary, and Temtem to name but a few. The way I see it, if Pokemon games are the standard for the monster catching genre, then these other games should be treated as accompaniments and other titles to enjoy. These games don't have to replace Pokemon for you, but they can give you more of what you already enjoy. I mean, I always think of the Soul series and how the Neo games came along with their own spin on that genre. They complement each other so well, and both of them are great in their own ways. And another thing to keep in mind is that these games are generally created out of a passion for the source material, especially with indie developers. The developers behind Coromon are longtime Pokemon fans who wanted to make a Pokemon-style game. Now, I have to say not all, but in general, these games aren't created to trick Pokemon fans or hurt the franchise. They aren't attacking or declaring war on Pokemon games. In fact, I'd say these developers want Pokemon fans to come and enjoy their game as well, and I really think that if you never tried one of these alternate monster catching games before, with all due respect, just step out of your bubble just a little bit and give them a go. It might even feel like a betrayal at first, and maybe you won't enjoy them as much as your Pokemon games. But that's fine, it's okay to enjoy them all, even at different levels for different reasons. In my opinion, Coromon is a charming and solid addition to the ever-growing list of monster-catching Pokemon-style games. Unsurprisingly, there is no voice acting to be heard, but I thought the story was quite compelling and relatively well written for a game of this type. I think the visuals are absolutely spot on in terms of what I was personally looking for, with great retro-inspired pixel art, smooth animation, mostly brilliant monster design, and a well-realized game world. The battle mechanics are tried, tested, and solid. They work well, and the Coromon potential system is a clever addition. Ultimately, I know that some people will dismiss this game right away. They'll say, look at this indie game trying to be Pokemon or trying to beat Pokemon. I don't think that's right though. I think these developers are attempting to be like Pokemon, not destroy it or replace it. I believe that these developers want to exist alongside Pokemon, and if more people gave these games a chance, they could do just that and everybody wins. I wholeheartedly recommend Coromon as an inexpensive companion piece, and I think if you're willing to embrace it, you might just like it. If you enjoy the video, I really hope you'll consider subscribing, and if you like what I do and want to help support the channel, please check out the first link in the video description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.